Welcome to Doll Customizing 101. I'm Artemis, and today I'll be teaching you the ins and the outs of rerooting. To start, here are the tools you'll need. A reroot tool, either self-made or bought, needles for the tool, pliers to tighten and loosen the tool, heat, either a hairdryer or some boiling water, hair, and of course, a doll. The basics of a reroot tool are pretty simple. Mine is from Shimmerlocks, but I believe it's a drill chuck that holds the needle in place. The needles are hand sewing needles that the eye of the needle is cut at an angle so that you can use it to grab hair and do the actual rerooting. You can make your own reroot tool either with a drill chuck, or here I'll show you how to turn an X-Acto knife handle into a rerooting tool. First, we're going to remove the blade, and here you can see the type of opening at the top of the X-Acto tool that you will need to insert your needle into the center of. Make sure it's nice and tight. Here with this example, I would actually have to cut the needle length down for it to work properly, as you don't want the needle to extend more than a ½ inch past the end of the tool. If the needle is too long, it leads to easier breaks and having to replace your needle more often. Now for probably the most important part of the tool, the needle guide. Here on screen you can see some needles and their sizes. The needles you use appear to be hand sewing needles for the most part from what I've seen from retailers, at least US based. It could be different worldwide. Most hand sewing needles go off of a similar size chart in that the larger the number is, the smaller the needle. I have a blog post linked below if you want to go learn more from someone who's done far more research, but if you're just getting started, I hope I'll be able to give you the information you need. I'll also be going here off of Shimmerlock's product, as I am most familiar with that. But it appears that most retailers recommend about the same size needles for projects and offer basically the same sizes. It is recommended here for you to use size 7 needles for part lines, hair lines, and sometimes rerooted lashes. Sizes 9 and 10 are more for vintage or silicone dolls when a very delicate touch is needed. Sizes 5 and 6 are going to be the majority of what you'll use for getting most reroots done, and sizes 1 and 3 are generally for larger dolls. For my personal opinion, I like to use a size 7 for a lot of my reroots just because I was worried about tearing the vinyl. I have since learned that heating up the head first or using a needle to widen the hole a little bit before you insert the plug will keep you from tearing the vinyl or breaking the needle about 90% of the time. I have gone through many size 7s as wear and tear, and not necessarily prepping the hole tends to break my needles quite easily. But rerooting is a little bit personalized to what you personally need. It can take a little bit of trial and error to find the right needle size that works best for you and your particular methods. What works for me, from what I have discovered, is that a size 5 works pretty well for hairlines on Monster High and Cave Club and similar sized dolls. You can get away with a size 3 for most of the plugs, but you will definitely want to make sure that you do some prep work, that you either use heat or you pre-widen the holes with the needle first if you're going to do that. Size 3 works wonderfully for hairlines for Rainbow High, but you can also get away with a size 1. If you're going to use the size 1 needle, make sure you have a well-heated head and that you're working with very squishy vinyl to prevent tearing. On to the prep work. If you're rerooting, you'll probably need to prepare your doll by removing the hair, assuming that the doll that you have came with hair, and using acetone to remove the factory painted scalp. You can of course leave the factory paint if you're going to do a similar color hair for your reroot, or if you plan to paint over it darker. I do personally like to leave my newly painted scalp for about 24 hours before I begin rerooting, just to make sure that nothing flakes off. Once the prep work is done, we can finally get into actually rerooting. If you're going to need to use heat for your reroot, here are some methods. You don't really need heat, or at least not a lot of heat, if you're going to be working with softer vinyl like Monster High or Cave Club or Barbie, but it can extend the life of your rerooting tool. As for Rainbow High, the heat is absolutely necessary. Your first option is going to be to use boiling water. I would use it in a cup and let the doll to soak, and then reheat the water as needed in the cup. Make sure you have a towel to protect your hands. Always be safe when working with boiling water. Alternatively, if you don't want to soak the head, you can protect it with a plastic bag. But be careful, as sometimes if you leave the bag in for too long, it can start to melt over time. The method I personally like to use is to use a hairdryer. I have a professional grade hairdryer, but you can definitely get away with something bought easily at Walmart. I use mine on full heat and hold the nozzle about an inch or so away from the head. It takes about 30 seconds to a minute to get the vinyl nice and soft, and then it's really easy to continue to reheat the head as you work on your reroot. There are many ways that you can prep the hair that you'll be using. I have here a clip from the Doll Boy here on YouTube that I used to use, where he would separate out the individual strands so that he could just grab a strand for a plug and continue on. Personally, I like to hold a small section of hair that I just loop over my finger so that I can pull the plugs directly off of it. I find that personally I have minimal hair loss with this way, but it was pretty minimal when I used to use the Doll Boy's method as well. For actually rerooting the hair, there are a couple of methods you could use. Most people tend to loop it around their finger, usually using the meaty part, but you can also use the tip of your finger. Personally, I like to do it around my nail because it gives a natural place for me to put the reroot tool to pick up the fibers. As far as the actual rooting methods, you can do a single loop just placed over your finger, or you can do a full loop around your finger, which when pulled tight on the reroot tool creates a little bit of a knot that holds the base of the hair into the head a little bit better. You can also do a full knot method where you actually tie a knot in one end of your weft and then you actually thread the entire thing through the doll head like you're sewing, basically. I haven't personally tried this method, so I can't give you a lot of information, but I have linked a blog post below that seems like it's got pretty good information if you'd like to try it out. And then one final method that I am aware of is that you can do kind of a hook and loop method that some retailers for fashion dolls actually use to reroot dolls. But to do it here, you kind of need access to the inside of the head. So here's a little clip from Doll Afterlife and one of the customs that they did where they basically rooted a mask. Again, they said that you need kind of the inside of the head to be available, so I'm not sure how reasonable this one would be to use regularly. Now I can actually show you some actual rerooting. Starting here, I have a Cave Club doll that I'm working on. I am using a size 7 needle for this, although I did break one needle while doing this reroot. I think maybe it would have been better to use a size 5, but currently I don't have any. For each plug, I pull out approximately 7 to 10 strands. If for some reason it doesn't feel like quite enough inside one plug, you can always go in with another, but keeping it to that 7 to 10 strands is going to keep the life of your needle a little longer. I root these plugs by holding the tool at about a 90-degree angle from the head and sort of twist the tool, trying to ease the needle into the hole. You don't want to use a ton of force, as that can lead to torn vinyl or broken needles. I'll let you watch a little bit more of this reroot and finish the rest off camera. For a monster high head, I am working on a G1 Kiyomi head. And again, I'm going to be using a size 7 needle on this reroot, sticking again to that 7 to 10 strands of hair per plug. She's been prepped for so long that honestly, I probably should have used some heat or pre-widened the holes with a needle here, as I did end up breaking 2 needles rerooting her head. I probably also should have stuck with maybe a size 5 or even a 3, and just stuck with a 5 on her part line and hairline. Same deal as before, try and hold the tool at a 90-degree angle and ease the needle into the hole. Don't force it through. If it's not going through with pretty minimal pressure, try using a little bit of heat or pre-poking the hole to make it a bit easier. And again, I'll finish this reroot off of camera. For my rainbow high head, I work on making sure the vinyl is nice and soft before I work. I find you don't want it to be too soft, because sometimes if it's too soft, the needle will just bend the head rather than actually going through the hole. But you also definitely want to make sure it's not so hard that it breaks the needle. I find that I can do about 4 plugs or so in this sweet spot before I have to kind of reheat the head, which is part of why I prefer the hairdryer method for heat. It's really easy to just keep it next to me as I continue to root. For this, I did use a size 1 for the entire reroot, just because I was curious if I could, or if it would end up tearing the vinyl. And honestly, it didn't. I wouldn't necessarily recommend. I would maybe recommend going for a size 3 for the hairline and part line though, as I found that the size 1 needle made it a little hard to see which hole I was actually plugging into. But again, I didn't have any, so I used what I had. For the part line on a rainbow high head, they use a cross-hatched part, which is just a fancy way of saying that they overlap one side over to the opposite side in a crisscross method. While I am rerooting a doll, I like to do this while I'm rerooting rather than waiting to the end and doing that whole thing over again. So for this, I will actually root on one side, pull it over to the opposite side, and then root on the other side and pull it back to where I started, and continue this until the part line is done. The final step in rerooting is deciding whether or not you're going to glue the hair plugs into the head. I find that Cave Club and Monster High that I've used kind of do need glue because their vinyl is so soft that the hair plugs can be pulled out really easily. I've tried a handful of different glue methods over the years and have found most of them I very much dislike.
So I'm gonna use
Currently, I am using a mixture of fabric glue and tacky glue. Not sponsored, but the brands that I use were the same for both, happen to be Eileen's. And I actually squeeze both glues inside the head and use a cotton swab to actually swirl that around, mix it in, and get all of the plugs. I find that it gives me decent flexibility, but also decent hold. Again, those glues that I've used in the past, I've used tacky glue, PVA glue, fabric glue, plain, and I found that they would get a little bit of glue seepage after maybe 2 or 3 months, or the head would be so hard that I wouldn't necessarily be able to put it back on its neck peg. So that's just some of what I've personally experienced. For rainbow high heads, I honestly don't glue them. I find that once the head is cooled back down, the vinyl is strong enough to hold the new plugs in place. That being said, I don't often restyle my custom dolls. They get one style and they sit on a shelf. I also don't really comb them regularly, so if you are a person that likes to play with the hair, comb it a lot, restyle it frequently, it might be safer for you to use that same combo of glue that I mentioned before. But again, it is entirely up to you. I did time each of my reroots to give you an idea of how long each head takes. The Cave Club doll I did first, and it took me about 3 hours and 45 minutes. Monster High Kiyomi took me about 5 hours and 25 minutes. And the Rainbow High head took me almost exactly 6 hours. I found for all of the heads, the majority of the time is filling in the part line and the hairline. But some rainbow high heads, like the one that I used specifically, had so many plugs previously from their original factory rooting that I filled maybe half the holes. So if I were to fill the full rerooted head, it would probably take me close to 7 to 8 hours, just to give you an idea. And that's it. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I thought I was going to be making a quick 5-minute tips and tricks video, and it ended up being enough information that I wanted to cover to basically be a course. I hope you all found this information really helpful, or at least maybe learned something new from it. And since you're still watching, if you wouldn't mind, if you haven't already, to give the subscribe button a little boop and tickle the bell so that YouTube will tell you when I upload new videos. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.